Hello and welcome to Transforming Your Church, a series of segments for your church board to watch and ask God, how can we put this into action so it will transform our church and help us be the congregation you want in this community and in the world. In this segment, I want to talk about the harvest cycle of momentum. You know, most churches are just kind of plan every week. They have a cycle for their worship service. They have a cycle for their deacon duties and their children's Sabbath schools. But the missing ingredient is the harvest cycle. How do you keep bringing people into the church? What does it take to keep bringing people into the church? Jesus said the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Pray the Lord of the harvest that he will thrust out workers into his harvest. Go, for I am sending you. And then Jesus, when he gave the gospel commission there in Matthew 28:19 and 20, he said, Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. One time Jesus told his disciples, the reason you're not seeing changed lives is because this only comes about through prayer and fasting. You take some of those ingredients that you find throughout the gospel and throughout Jesus' ministry, and you begin seeing emerging a harvest cycle. And it goes something like this. It begins with fasting and prayer. Now, when we say fasting, some people say, whoa, if I go and miss a meal, I start getting headaches. We're not just talking about fasting from food, although many of us could use a little bit more fasting from food. We're talking about taking a whole week to fast from either a bad habit that is breaking us down or a good habit that's distracting us from the mission. In fact, we encourage the entire church to be involved in a week of fasting and prayer. Begins one Sabbath. It's announced by the elder or by one of the other board members or perhaps the pastor. This next week is a week of fasting and prayer in our harvest cycle. And we're inviting everybody to fast from a bad habit or a good habit, whatever it's going to take to help us focus and spend more time in being available for God's work. So the first part of the harvest cycle is the fasting and prayer, and we encourage a week of fasting and prayer. On the second Sabbath, you get testimonies back, and the testimonies are thrilling. I've heard people come up and say, I asked God, what should I fast from? And he impressed me that whenever I get on the computer for work, I always go through the news a bunch of time for a long time, but I never have time to read the Bible. And so I said, I'm going to fast from reading the news, and I'm going to read the good news. And he said, this week has been some of the best time I've had with God. I heard another lady say, I asked the Lord what to fast from for a week, and he impressed me. Those trips to St. Arbuck's, also known as Starbucks. I shouldn't be going there so often because I know it's not good for me, but I like the taste of it, and if I don't have that, maybe I'll have a little more money to use for God's work, a little more time. On the third day, I had a splitting headache, but the fourth day I was free, and I realized I don't need to be addicted to my trips to St. Arbuck's anymore. And people start going, wow, boy, where'd that come from? And people start sharing those testimonies. So that week of fasting and prayer, that's the first segment. Then the next segment of the harvest cycle is to try to scatter the seed as far and wide as we can and bring people into small family groups. So we begin doing all kinds of massive distribution of literature, as much as we can, wherever we go. And then we find the best interest and we try to get Bible study groups started in their home or in our home. And then it comes along till we get to a place where there is a week of reaping. Now that week of reaping focuses on changed lives, and coming up to that week of reaping, you're praying that during that week, at least one person will be baptized and unite with God's final movement. You don't know if they will, but you're planning for that. Who preaches during that time? It can be some of you on the church board that preach your first sermons. There are series that are produced that have all the scripts and all the PowerPoint materials, and you can get those, and you can talk to your pastor or your conference office and get those materials so that you actually can practice and present those materials. And as you're preaching, you'll get stronger and clearer in your understanding of truth. Now, in many places, there have been materials produced by video where there is a week of reaping with somebody who is a seasoned evangelist. You take one of those and you watch those either in small groups or as a congregation, and they will help make appeals for decisions that you might not be as comfortable in making. There are some that have been recorded with people such as Jack Colon and Byron Corbett and John Bradshaw and others, and those materials you can put up on the screen or you can show in a home, and they will present the gospel in a Christ-centered, winning way and invite people to make decisions. And during that week, to see at least one person baptized, you know all heaven is rejoicing. And then after that reaping phase, you come back around where you need to grow the people. And that's where you make sure that they go into a new members and visitors Sabbath school class, and that you get them into, you ask if they'll open up their home for a midweek family group where a couple people from the church come and study with them and go through a series on amazing facts. And you're just building them in and building their friendship base around. And with this harvest cycle, you're now ready to begin reaching their friends. Because look at it this way. Whenever anybody makes a decision to follow Jesus and unite with His church, what happens is they have a circle of friends outside the church, and they only have about 6 months to reach those friends. If they don't get them in 6 months, they have shifted their friendships to inside the church, and they no longer have very much credibility with those outside the church. So churches really need at least 2 harvest cycles a year. 6 months and 6 months, so the people they win in the first harvest cycle can bring their friends to the second harvest cycle so that you might bring them in. This is the way that you can build momentum in a church. So it's crucial that your church have some type of harvest cycle in at least 2 a year. Where did these ideas come from? These ideas came from places where the work is growing very rapidly. When a group of short-term missionaries went from the North Pacific Union down to the country of Bolivia, they discovered what was happening in Bolivia. They were having 2 and 3 harvest cycles a year. But for their final reaping week, they would actually have a guest evangelist preach in one of their major cities. It would be satellited up and down to all of their churches, even the churches way up in the high Andes. They had had people carry up satellite dishes that could reach the signal way up there in primitive places and have the people come in. And in this way, the entire conference, the entire union was on the same harvest cycle. And you could know that if you were reaching out to people in your neighborhood, if you had relatives that needed the Lord in another city, they were reaching out at the same time. I can envision, as your church discusses harvest cycles, as you get into harvest cycles and get into a regular rhythm and a regular pattern, you put it on the calendar. I can envision more and more churches doing that, and churches beginning to cooperate with each other more and more, so that we see people coming in multiple places under coordinated efforts at soul winning. You know, God didn't design for each church to be an island unto itself, or each pastor to live in their own little world. This is a movement that is to work together under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, working together with humble hearts. And as your church talks about a harvest cycle, I encourage you right now to take a little time to discuss it, and then actually pick the date for your week of reaping in the first part of the year, and the date for your week of reaping in the last part of the year, and then back up a few months and pick your week of fasting and prayer and your week of fasting and prayer. And then you'll know where to put the family groups and Bible study groups and make sure these other pieces fall into place. But if you schedule it and assign a few people to work on it, it's more likely to happen. I want you to discuss this as a church and see what God can do to use you in integrating a harvest cycle into your local church. And I'm praying that as you do it, and more churches do it, and more conferences do it, and more unions do it, that we see that harvest that is plentiful God talked about. We see the workers going out, and we see people coming in. And the next harvest cycle, their friends and family coming in, until it builds and builds and builds and builds, until millions are ready to look up and say, "Lo, This is our God. We've waited for him, and he will save us. May God help you in taking steps in that direction.